2. About Cervantes and Don Quixote. He felt, no doubt, that a man of such resource, energy, and daring, was too dangerous a piece of property to be left in private hands, and he had him heavily ironed and lodged in his own prison. If he thought that by these means he could break the spirit or shake the resolution of his prisoner, he was soon undeceived, for Cervantes contrived before long to dispatch a letter to the governor of Oran, entreating him to send him someone that could be trusted, to enable him and 3 other gentlemen, fellow captives of his, to make their escape, intending evidently to renew his first attempt with a more trustworthy guide. Unfortunately, the Moor who carried the letter was stopped just outside Oran, and the letter being found upon him, he was sent back to Algiers, where by the order of the day he was promptly impaled as a warning to others, while Cervantes was condemned to receive 2,000 blows of the stick, a number which most likely would have deprived the world of Don Quixote, had not some persons, who they were we know not, interceded on his behalf. After this he seems to have been kept in still closer confinement than before, for nearly 2 years passed before he made another attempt. This time his plan was to purchase, by the aid of a Spanish renegade and 2 Valencian merchants resident in Algiers, an armed vessel in which he and about 60 of the leading captives were to make their escape. But just as they were about to put it into execution, one Dr. Juan Blanco de Paz, an ecclesiastic and a compatriot, informed the day of the plot. Cervantes, by force of character, by his self-devotion, by his untiring energy and his exertions to lighten the lot of his companions in misery, had endeared himself to all, and become the leading spirit in the captive colony, and, incredible as it may seem, jealousy of his influence and the esteem in which he was held, moved this man to compass his destruction by a cruel death. The merchants, finding that the Dey knew all, and fearing that Cervantes under torture might make disclosures that would imperil their own lives, tried to persuade him to slip away on board a vessel that was on the point of sailing for Spain. But he told them they had nothing to fear, for no tortures would make him compromise anybody, and he went at once and gave himself up to the Dey. As before, the Dey tried to force him to name his accomplices. Everything was made ready for his immediate execution. The halter was put round his neck and his hands tied behind him, but all that could be got from him was that he himself, with the help of 4 gentlemen who had since left Algiers, had arranged the whole, and that the 60 who were to accompany him were not to know anything of it until the last moment. Finding he could make nothing of him, the Dey sent him back to prison more heavily ironed than before. The poverty-stricken Cervantes family had been all this time trying once more to raise the ransom money, and at last a sum of 300 ducats was got together and entrusted to the Redemptorist Father Juan Gil, who was about to sail for Algiers. The Dey, however, demanded more than double the sum offered, and as his term of office had expired and he was about to sail for Constantinople, taking all his slaves with him, the case of Cervantes was critical. He was already on board heavily ironed, when the Dey at length agreed to reduce his demand by 1/2, and Father Gil by borrowing was able to make up the amount, and on September 19, 1580, after a captivity of 5 years all but a week, Cervantes was at last set free. Before long he discovered that Blanco de Paz, who claimed to be an officer of the Inquisition, was now concocting on false evidence a charge of misconduct to be brought against him on his return to Spain. To checkmate him, Cervantes drew up a series of 25 questions, covering the whole period of his captivity, upon which he requested Father Gil to take the depositions of credible witnesses before a notary. Chapter 11. What befell Don Quixote with certain goatherds. He was cordially welcomed by the goatherds, and Sancho, having as best he could put up Rocinante and the ass, drew towards the fragrance that came from some pieces of salted goat simmering in a pot on the fire, and though he would have liked at once to try if they were ready to be transferred from the pot to the stomach, he refrained from doing so as the goatherds removed them from the fire, and laying sheepskins on the ground, quickly spread their rude table, and with signs of hearty goodwill invited them both to share what they had. Round the skins 6 of the men belonging to the fold seated themselves, having first with rough politeness pressed Don Quixote to take a seat upon a trough which they placed for him upside down. Don Quixote seated himself, and Sancho remained standing to serve the cup, which was made of horn. Seeing him standing, his master said to him, "That thou mayest see, Sancho, the good that knight-errantry contains in itself, and how those who fill any office in it are on the high road to be speedily honored and esteemed by the world, I desire that thou seat thyself here at my side and in the company of these worthy people, and that thou be one with me who am thy master and natural lord, and that thou eat from my plate and drink from whatever I drink from. For the same may be said of knight-errantry as of love, that it levels all. Great thanks, said Sancho, but I may tell your worship that provided I have enough to eat, I can eat it as well, or better, standing, and by myself, than seated alongside of an emperor. And indeed, if the truth is to be told, what I eat in my corner without form or fuss has much more relish for me, even though it be bread and onions, than the turkeys of those other tables where I am forced to chew slowly, drink little, wipe my mouth every minute, and cannot sneeze or cough if I want or do other things that are the privileges of liberty and solitude. So, Señor, as for these honors which your worship would put upon me as a servant and follower of knight-errantry, exchange them for other things which may be of more use and advantage to me. For these, though I fully acknowledge them as received, I renounce from this moment to the end of the world. For all that, said Don Quixote, thou must seat thyself, because him who humbleth himself God exalteth, and seizing him by the arm he forced him to sit down beside himself. The goatherds did not understand this jargon about squires and knights-errant, and all they did was to eat in silence and stare at their guests, who with great elegance and appetite were stowing away pieces as big as one's fist. The course of meat finished, they spread upon the sheepskins a great heap of parched acorns, and with them they put down a half cheese harder than if it had been made of mortar. All this while the horn was not idle, for it went round so constantly, now full, now empty, like the bucket of a water wheel, that it soon drained one of the 2 wine skins that were in sight. When Don Quixote had quite appeased his appetite he took up a handful of the acorns, and contemplating them attentively delivered himself somewhat in this fashion. Happy the age, happy the time, to which the ancients gave the name of golden, not because in that fortunate age the gold so coveted in this our iron one was gained without toil, but because they that lived in it knew not the 2 words, mine, and thine. In that blessed age all things were in common. To win the daily food no labor was required of any save to stretch forth his hand and gather it from the sturdy oaks that stood generously inviting him with their sweet ripe fruit. The clear streams and running brooks yielded their savory limpid waters in noble abundance. The busy and sagacious bees fixed their republic in the clefts of the rocks and hollows of the trees, offering without usance the plenteous produce of their fragrant toil to every hand. The mighty cork trees, unenforced save of their own courtesy, shed the broad light bark that served at first to roof the houses supported by rude stakes, a protection against the inclemency of heaven alone. Then all was peace, all friendship, all concord. As yet the dull share of the crooked plough had not dared to rend and pierce the tender bowels of our first mother that without compulsion yielded from every portion of her broad fertile bosom all that could satisfy, sustain, and delight the children that then possessed her. Then was it that the innocent and fair young shepherdess roamed from vale to vale and hill to hill, with flowing locks, and no more garments than were needful modestly to cover what modesty seeks and ever sought to hide. Nor were there ornaments like those in use today, set off by Tyrian purple, and silk tortured in endless fashions, but the wreathed leaves of the green dock and ivy, wherewith they went as bravely and becomingly decked as our court dames with all the rare and far-fetched artifices that idle curiosity has taught them. Then the love thoughts of the heart clothed themselves simply and naturally as the heart conceived them, nor sought to commend themselves by forced and rambling verbiage. Fraud, deceit, or malice had then not yet mingled with truth and sincerity. Justice held her ground, undisturbed and unassailed by the efforts of favor and of interest, that now so much impair, pervert, and beset her. Arbitrary law had not yet established itself in the mind of the judge, for then there was no cause to judge and no one to be judged. Maidens and modesty, as I have said, wandered at will alone and unattended, without fear of insult from lawlessness or libertine assault, and if they were undone it was of their own will and pleasure. But now in this hateful age of ours not one is safe, not though some new labyrinth like that of Crete conceal and surround her. Even there the pestilence of gallantry will make its way to them through chinks or on the air by the zeal of its accursed importunity, and, despite of all seclusion, lead them to ruin. In defense of these, as time advanced and wickedness increased, the order of knights errant was instituted, to defend maidens, to protect widows and to succor the orphans and the needy. To this order I belong, brother goatherds, to whom I return thanks for the hospitality and kindly welcome ye offer me and my squire. For though by natural law all living are bound to show favor to knights errant, yet, seeing that without knowing this obligation ye have welcomed and feasted me, it is right that with all the goodwill in my power I should thank you for yours. All this long harangue, which might very well have been spared, our knight delivered because the acorns they gave him reminded him of the golden age, and the whim seized him to address all this unnecessary argument to the goatherds, who listened to him gaping in amazement without saying a word in reply. Sancho likewise held his peace and ate acorns, and paid repeated visits to the second wineskin, which they had hung up on a cork tree to keep the wine cool. Don Quixote was longer in talking than the supper in finishing, at the end of which one of the goatherds said, "That your worship, Señor Knight-errant, may say with more truth that we show you hospitality with ready goodwill. We will give you amusement and pleasure by making one of our comrades sing. He will be here before long, and he is a very intelligent youth and deep in love, and what is more he can read and write and play on the rebeck to perfection." The goatherd had hardly done speaking, when the notes of the rebeck reached their ears, and shortly after, the player came up, a very good-looking young man of about 22. His comrades asked him if he had supped, and on his replying that he had, he who had already made the offer said to him, "In that case, Antonio, thou mayest as well do us the pleasure of singing a little, that the gentleman, our guest, may see that even in the mountains and woods there are musicians. We have told him of thy accomplishments, and we want thee to show them and prove that we say true. So, as thou livest, pray sit down and sing that ballad about thy love that thy uncle the prebendary made thee, and that was so much liked in the town." "With all my heart," said the young man, and without waiting for more pressing he seated himself on the trunk of a felled oak, and tuning his rebeck, presently began to sing to these words. Antonio's Ballad. Thou dost love me well, Olaya. Well I know it, even though love's mute tongues, thine eyes, have never by their glances told me so. For I know my love thou knowest. Therefore thine to claim I dare. Once it ceases to be secret, love need never feel despair. True it is, Olaya, sometimes thou hast all too plainly shown that thy heart is brass in hardness, and thy snowy bosom stone. Yet for all that, in thy coyness, and thy fickle fits between, hope is there, at least the border of her garment may be seen. Lures to faith are they, those glimpses, and to faith in thee I hold. Kindness cannot make it stronger, coldness cannot make it cold. If it be that love is gentle, in thy gentleness I see something holding out assurance to the hope of winning thee. If it be that in devotion lies a power hearts to move, that which every day I show thee, helpful to my suit should prove. Many a time thou must have noticed, if to notice thou dost care, how I go about on Monday, dressed in all my Sunday wear. Love's eyes love to look on brightness. Love loves what is gaily dressed. Sunday, Monday, all I care is, thou shouldst see me in my best. No account I make of dances, or of strains that please thee so, keeping thee awake from midnight till the cocks began to crow, or of how I roundly swore it, that there's none so fair as thou. True it is, but as I said it, by the girls I'm hated now. For Teresa of the hillside, at my praise of thee was sore, said, you think you love an angel, it's a monkey you adore. Caught by all her glittering trinkets, and her borrowed braids of hair, and a host of made-up beauties, that would love himself ensnare. 'Twas a lie, and so I told her. And her cousin at the word gave me his defiance for it. And what followed thou hast heard. Mine is no high-flown affection, mine no passion par amours, as they call it. What I offer is an honest love, and pure cunning cords the holy church has. Cords of softest silk they be. Put thy neck beneath the yoke, dear. Mine will follow, thou wilt see. Else, and once for all I swear it, by the saint of most renown, if I ever quit the mountains, 'twill be in a friar's gown. Here the goatherd brought his song to an end, and though Don Quixote entreated him to sing more, Sancho had no mind that way, being more inclined for sleep than for listening to songs. So said he to his master, "Your worship will do well to settle at once where you mean to pass the night, for the labor these good men are at all day does not allow them to spend the night in singing." "I understand thee, Sancho," replied Don Quixote. "I perceive clearly that those visits to the wine-skin demand compensation in sleep rather than in music." "It's sweet to us all, blessed be God," said Sancho. "I do not deny it," replied Don Quixote, "but settle thyself where thou wilt. Those of my calling are more becomingly employed in watching than in sleeping. Still it would be as well if thou wert to dress this ear for me again, for it is giving me more pain than it need." Sancho did as he bade him, but one of the goatherds, seeing the wound, told him not to be uneasy, as he would apply a remedy with which it would be soon healed, and gathering some leaves of rosemary, of which there was a great quantity there, he chewed them and mixed them with a little salt, and applying them to the ear he secured them firmly with a bandage, assuring him that no other treatment would be required, and so it proved. Chapter 12. Of what a goatherd related to those with Don Quixote. Just then another young man, one of those who fetched their provisions from the village, came up and said, "Do you know what is going on in the village, comrades?" "How could we know it?" replied one of them. "Well, then, you must know," continued the young man. "This morning that famous student shepherd called Chrysostom died, and it is rumored that he died of love for that devil of a village girl, the daughter of Guillermo the Rich, she that wanders about the wolds here in the dress of a shepherdess." "You mean Marcella," said one. "Her I mean," answered the goatherd, "and the best of it is, he has directed in his will that he is to be buried in the fields like a Moor, and at the foot of the rock where the cork tree spring is, because, as the story goes, and they say he himself said so, that was the place where he first saw her. And he has also left other directions which the clergy of the village say should not and must not be obeyed because they savor of paganism. To all which his great friend Ambrosio the student, he who, like him, also went dressed as a shepherd, replies that everything must be done without any omission according to the directions left by Chrysostom, and about this the village is all in commotion. However, report says that, after all, what Ambrosio and all the shepherds his friends desire will be done, and tomorrow they are coming to bury him with great ceremony, where I said, I am sure it will be something worth seeing. At least I will not fail to go and see it even if I knew I should not return to the village tomorrow." "We will do the same," answered the goatherds, "and cast lots to see who must stay to mind the goats of all." "Thou sayest well, Pedro," said one, "though there will be no need of taking that trouble, for I will stay behind for all, and don't suppose it is virtue or want of curiosity in me, it is that the splinter that ran into my foot the other day will not let me walk." "For all that, we thank thee," answered Pedro. Don Quixote asked Pedro to tell him who the dead man was and who the shepherdess, to which Pedro replied that all he knew was that the dead man was a wealthy gentleman belonging to a village in those mountains, who had been a student at Salamanca for many years, at the end of which he returned to his village with the reputation of being very learned and deeply read. Above all, they said, he was learned in the science of the stars and of what went on yonder in the heavens and the sun and the moon, for he told us of the cris of the sun and moon to exact time. "Eclipse it is called, friend, not cris, the darkening of those two luminaries," said Don Quixote, but Pedro, not troubling himself with trifles, went on with his story, saying, also he foretold when the year was going to be one of abundance or estility. "Sterility, you mean," said Don Quixote. "Sterility or estility," answered Pedro, "it is all the same in the end. And I can tell you that by this his father and friends who believed him grew very rich because they did as he advised them, bidding them, sow barley this year, not wheat. This year you may sow pulse and not barley. The next there will be a full oil crop, and the 3 following not a drop will be got." "That science is called astrology," said Don Quixote. "I do not know what it is called," replied Pedro, "but I know that he knew all this and more besides." But, to make an end, not many months had passed after he returned from Salamanca, when one day he appeared dressed as a shepherd with his crook and sheepskin, having put off the long gown he wore as a scholar, and at the same time his great friend, Ambrosio by name, who had been his companion in his studies, took to the shepherd's dress with him. I forgot to say that Chrysostom, who is dead, was a great man for writing verses, so much so that he made carols for Christmas Eve, and plays for Corpus Christi, which the young men of our village acted, and all said they were excellent. When the villagers saw the two scholars so unexpectedly appearing in shepherd's dress, they were lost in wonder, and could not guess what had led them to make so extraordinary a change. About this time the father of our Chrysostom died, and he was left heir to a large amount of property in chattels as well as in land, no small number of cattle and sheep, and a large sum of money, of all of which the young man was left dissolute owner, and indeed he was deserving of it all, for he was a very good comrade, and kind-hearted, and a friend of worthy folk, and had a countenance like a benediction. Presently it came to be known that he had changed his dress with no other object than to wander about these wastes after that shepherdess Marcella our lad mentioned a while ago, with whom the deceased Chrysostom had fallen in love. And I must tell you now, for it is well you should know it, who this girl is, perhaps, and even without any perhaps, you will not have heard anything like it all the days of your life, though you should live more years than Sarna. Say Sarah, said Don Quixote, unable to endure the Goatherd's confusion of words. The Sarna lives long enough, answered Pedro, and if, Señor, you must go finding fault with words at every step, we shall not make an end of it this 12-month. Pardon me, friend, said Don Quixote, but, as there is such a difference between Sarna and Sarah, I told you of it. However, you have answered very rightly, for Sarna lives longer than Sarah. So continue your story, and I will not object any more to anything. I say then, my dear sir, said the goatherd, that in our village there was a farmer even richer than the father of Chrysostom, who was named Guillermo, and upon whom God bestowed, over and above great wealth, a daughter at whose birth her mother died, the most respected woman there was in this neighborhood. I fancy I can see her now with that countenance which had the sun on one side and the moon on the other, and moreover active, and kind to the poor, for which I trust that at the present moment her soul is in bliss with God in the other world. Her husband Guillermo died of grief at the death of so good a wife, leaving his daughter Marcella, a child and rich, to the care of an uncle of hers, a priest and prebendary in our village. The girl grew up with such beauty that it reminded us of her mother's, which was very great, and yet it was thought that the daughters would exceed it. And so when she reached the age of 14 to 15 years nobody beheld her but blessed God that had made her so beautiful, and the greater number were in love with her past redemption. Her uncle kept her in great seclusion and retirement, but for all that the fame of her great beauty spread so that, as well for it as for her great wealth, her uncle was asked, solicited, and importuned, to give her in marriage not only by those of our town but of those many leagues round, and by the persons of highest quality in them. But he, being a good Christian man, though he desired to give her in marriage at once, seeing her to be old enough, was unwilling to do so without her consent, not that he had any eye to the gain and profit which the custody of the girl's property brought him while he put off her marriage. And, faith, this was said in praise of the good priest in more than one set in the town. For I would have you know, Sir Errant, that in these little villages everything is talked about and everything is carped at, and rest assured, as I am, that the priest must be over and above good who forces his parishioners to speak well of him, especially in villages. That is the truth, said Don Quixote, but go on, for the story is very good, and you, good Pedro, tell it with very good grace. May that of the Lord not be wanting to me, said Pedro, that is the one to have. To proceed, you must know that though the uncle put before his niece and described to her the qualities of each one in particular of the many who had asked her in marriage, begging her to marry and make a choice according to her own taste, she never gave any other answer than that she had no desire to marry just yet, and that being so young she did not think herself fit to bear the burden of matrimony. At these, to all appearance, reasonable excuses that she made, her uncle ceased to urge her, and waited till she was somewhat more advanced in age and could mate herself to her own liking. For, said he, and he said quite right, parents are not to settle children in life against their will. But when one least looked for it, lo and behold, one day the demure Marcella makes her appearance turned shepherdess, and, in spite of her uncle and all those of the town that strove to dissuade her, took to going afield with the other shepherd lasses of the village, and tending her own flock. And so, since she appeared in public, and her beauty came to be seen openly, I could not well tell you how many rich youths, gentlemen and peasants, have adopted the costume of Chrysostom, and go about these fields making love to her. One of these, as has been already said, was our deceased friend, of whom they say that he did not love but adore her. But you must not suppose, because Marcella chose a life of such liberty and independence, and of so little or rather no retirement, that she has given any occasion, or even the semblance of one, for disparagement of her purity and modesty. On the contrary, such and so great is the vigilance with which she watches over her honor, that of all those that court and woo her not one has boasted, or can with truth boast, that she has given him any hope however small of obtaining his desire. For although she does not avoid or shun the society and conversation of the shepherds, and treats them courteously and kindly, should any one of them come to declare his intention to her, though it be one as proper and holy as that of matrimony, she flings him from her like a catapult. And with this kind of disposition she does more harm in this country than if the plague had got into it, for her affability and her beauty draw on the hearts of those that associate with her to love her and to court her, but her scorn and her frankness bring them to the brink of despair, and so they know not what to say save to proclaim her aloud cruel and hard-hearted, and other names of the same sort which well describe the nature of her character. And if you should remain here any time, Señor, you would hear these hills and valleys resounding with the laments of the rejected ones who pursue her. Not far from this there is a spot where there are a couple of dozen of tall beeches, and there is not one of them but has carved and written on its smooth bark the name of Marcella, and above some a crown carved on the same tree, as though her lover would say more plainly that Marcella wore and deserved that of all human beauty. Here one shepherd is sighing, there another is lamenting, there love songs are heard, here despairing elegies. One will pass all the hours of the night seated at the foot of some oak or rock, and there, without having closed his weeping eyes, the sun finds him in the morning bemused and bereft of sense, and another without relief or respite to his sighs, stretched on the burning sand in the full heat of the sultry summer noontide, makes his appeal to the compassionate heavens, and over one and the other, over these and all, the beautiful Marcella triumphs free and careless. And all of us that know her are waiting to see what her pride will come to, and who is to be the happy man that will succeed in taming a nature so formidable and gaining possession of a beauty so supreme. All that I have told you being such well-established truth, I am persuaded that what they say of the cause of Chrysostom's death, as our lad told us, is the same. And so I advise you, Señor, fail not to be present tomorrow at his burial, which will be well worth seeing, for Chrysostom had many friends, and it is not half a league from this place to where he directed he should be buried. I will make a point of it, said Don Quixote, and I thank you for the pleasure you have given me by relating so interesting a tale. Oh, said the goatherd, I do not know even the half of what has happened to the lovers of Marcella, but perhaps tomorrow we may fall in with some shepherd on the road who can tell us. And now it will be well for you to go and sleep under cover, for the night air may hurt your wound, though with the remedy I have applied to you there is no fear of an untoward result. Sancho Panza, who was wishing the goatherd's loquacity at the devil, on his part begged his master to go into Pedro's hut to sleep. He did so, and passed all the rest of the night in thinking of his lady Dulcinea, in imitation of the lovers of Marcella. Sancho Panza settled himself between Rocinante and his ass, and slept, not like a lover who had been discarded, but like a man who had been soundly kicked.